Hello and welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Nazia Iqbal and here's a look at the stories for the day. The government came out with an advisory last Thursday asking parents to exercise caution while dealing with companies offering online classes for children. Scores of do's and don'ts suggested by the government raised question marks over the way the educational technology or edtech companies were functioning in the country. What compelled the centre to make such an appeal to citizens, and does it put the edtech firms in a dock? This report finds out some answers.
With several allegations against a leading edtech company, the Education Ministry released an advisory for parents. It said some edtech companies are luring parents under the garb of offering free services. It asked them to avoid the automatic debit option for payment of subscription fees and also to read the terms and conditions carefully before making any move. The advisory added that success stories advertised by these edtech companies could be a trap to acquire users. During the recently concluded winter session of Parliament, Congress MP Karti Chidambaram talked about what he called predatory sales tactics of edtech companies.
Today, sir, if you wanted to start an educational institution, you need to get a plethora of permissions. Your curriculum has to be vetted. You have to have a staff of a certain caliber. You need to pay the staff certain salaries according to perhaps the UGC or according to whatever the government regulations are. But today, there are online educational companies which are worth billions of dollars. Some of them are worth even more than the entire educational budget of India. These companies offer courses online which are not vetted by anybody. Nobody knows the content of these courses. Nobody knows the quality of these courses. Nobody knows the caliber of these courses. Nobody knows what is the caliber of the tutors who are on these who are conducting these courses. These companies now are engaging in predatory marketing practices where they prey upon the aspirational poorer people who want to give their children a better education, who want to supplement their education which they are not getting in government schools. They force them to buy courses and they auto-debit their accounts.
This outrage against edtech companies is not recent. In fact, edtech firms such as Byju's have been pulled to consumer courts on several occasions by disgruntled parents who have alleged cheating by the company's sales agents. Last week, a consumer court in Pune ordered Byju's to pay Rs 50,000 as compensation after a customer had complained that she didn't receive the promised refund of course fees from the company. The customer also claimed that Byju's had got a Rs 1.1 lakh loan sanctioned in her name without her consent. We reached out to Byju's last week for their stance on these recent allegations, but didn't receive a response till the time of publishing this video. On consumer complaint forums and social media, several users have given a template of what the typical sales call for an edtech company looks like. If it is an in-person visit, the salesperson will belittle the child's intellect and urge the parents to take the edtech subscription to secure his future. Most salespersons also express apprehension about the child's education because of the condition of government schools. Parents, some from the lower strata of society, usually take loans to fund the cost of the course. While there is usually the clause for free cancellation during the 15 to 30 days of trial period, once that expires, there is usually a lock-in period that runs into years. Several families look to cancel their subscription if they feel that the quality of the course is subpar, but they cannot due to the lock-in. Families also face hurdles in getting the promised refund during the trial period and discover that their accounts are being debited for EMIs of loans that they didn't sign up for. Several such cases have reached consumer courts. Such sales tactics have gained prominence because the pricing of these courses of around Rs 20,000 to 30,000 for say math for class 6th and over Rs 1 lakh for say math from classes 6 to 12 is often unaffordable for people from lower income groups. On the condition of anonymity, a startup investor told Business Standard that while most allegations about a toxic sales culture have come up against Byju's, it's in fact a standard playbook across all Indian edtech companies with offerings for the K-12 or school learning segment. This is because most of these companies share the same venture capital investors. These investors then ask their portfolio companies to follow the market leader to increase sales. The Indian edtech space has seen phenomenal growth since last year. While startups in this sector had raised over $500 million in funding in 2019, since last year, Indian edtech startups have raised over $4 billion. We also have 5 edtech unicorns now. as opposed to just one before the pandemic. However, there are justifiable concerns about the quality of these edtech courses and whether these new age startups have the best interests of the customers in mind. Experts have suggested that the Indian edtech sector is due for a regulatory intervention by the government. They have suggested a Netflix like monthly subscription model with no minimum lock in period. This would force edtech companies to come up with quality products for user retention. We spoke to Gauri Gupta, Director for EdTech at Central Square Foundation, to understand more about how the EdTech sector can be regulated without stifling innovation in the space.
Pre-pandemic, we had over 5,000 EdTech solutions in the country. Post-pandemic, this number is likely to be much higher. These solutions support parents and schools with a wide range of offering, from assessments to self-learning, tech for teachers, administration, coding, skilling, so on and so forth. We see innovation afoot in India that is very exciting. Today, there are as many believers as there are skeptics about the use of technology in education. Such polarized views stem from information asymmetry and a common understanding of what good looks like in EdTech. If we can create awareness amongst the consumers of EdTech, and I refer to both retail and institutional, around quality, EdTech companies will be forced to create products that deliver quality learning outcomes.
Even the staunchest critics of Indian edtech would admit that the sector has tremendous potential in a country with a largely poor quality of education in its schools and universities. The government's advisory may lead to some soul searching in the sector. Perhaps edtech companies will now temper their growth ambitions to prioritize customer concerns above everything else.
Despite concerns over the quality of courses and aggressive sales culture, EdTech companies in India witnessed phenomenal growth since last year. That was when most other industries were going through a tumultuous time. But the economy is now on a recovery path. There are green shoots across industries and we need to build on that, believes FICCI President and HUL CMD Sanjeev Mehta. In an interview with Business Standard's Individual Dasmana, Mehta says capacity utilization and capital spending need to start in a big way to achieve desired macroeconomic growth. Let's join the conversation.
So to start with our conversation, my first question to you would be that you are taking the charge of FICCI President at a time when the economy is still not out of the woods. So what will you recommend to the government to expedite the economic recovery?
Today we are talking about a scenario where we will end this fiscal year with a GDP growth rate which would be hopefully upwards of 9%, which would mean we would be more or less back to the $3 trillion economy mark. And there are many green shoots today. I think first and foremost is the speed of vaccination. Then when you look at our tax collection, it has been very robust for the last 7 months. They're bordering 30% as compared to the same period in 2019. Then when you look at it from a lens of FDI, they have been very robust this year. Then when you look at exports, the merchandise exports, at the beginning of the year when the target of 400 billion was talking about, it was looking like a very tough ask. But now that looks very doable. Then the question you may have is what more we need to do. We crave for growth rates upwards of 8% on a sustained basis. We crave for inclusive growth. And the classic thing we need as a country is what you call as the virtuous cycle, where you have robust demand, which leads to more capital spending. Now, if you look at it from this lens, I think private consumption has still to reach a level where you can say that we are happy with it. The private investment cycle has still to kick in. There are various factors we can analyze, but the capacity utilization is still in the 60s and 70s. And once the demand moves up, and that's when the capital investment cycle will kick in. You can't say that the economy has recovered. It is in the process of recovery, and there are a lot of green shoots in the economy, so we need to build on that.
You talked about muted private consumption still. In that context, ahead of the budget, what will you recommend to the finance minister? Is there a case for increasing threshold for income tax to increase disposable income of the masses?
Government should look at what do they need to do to fuel consumption. And the first bit is during the intervening period, the government spending should not stop. If you look at over the last 2 years, the sectors which have been impacted adversely are the service sectors in urban areas, especially the contact service. Yeah, we know a lot of restaurants have closed down, for instance. And so those are the things, hotels, tourism, all that have got impacted. So that would need support. MSMEs by the very nature are more fragile. Then we need to ask ourselves that how do we put more money in the hand of people? Yeah, because what we need now is spending, because that will kickstart the virtuous cycle.
So what is it that is not letting private sector invest now, since economy is in the recovery process?
But if you look at broader picture, a lot of capacity got created in yesteryears. Yeah, and that's the reason why the capacity utilization is still in the 60s and 70s. And the good bit is today that the banking industry is on a much stronger base. So there is the strength to lend. Yeah, but the lending will start when the capacity utilization goes up, which would be based on the demand, and then the investments will happen. And also, I don't think the risk-taking capacity of Indian business has gone away. No.
Companies are facing high input prices.
That's
and
right.
Passing it on to consumers. HUL had also done that in some products.
That's
so
right.
How do you see going forward? Will companies be able to pass all increase in input prices to consumers? And how do you see inflation trajectory?
For some commodities, the inflation has been unprecedented. Over the last 2-year period, the tea prices went up significantly, especially last year. Yeah, but that was more linked to supply constraints. And the palm oil prices went up tremendously. Then the oil prices, and the derivatives, chemicals, they have gone up significantly, which has fueled. And when all three come together, you get the kind of inflation which we had not seen in many years. So yes, inflation is there. But there is no one-to-one correlation between input price inflation and end consumer price of finished products. Because we always try to optimize different lines of P&L, play different levers of business, and then look at price increase. And when we look at price increase, you always try to ensure that the price-value equation remains intact. I think the most important bit during this time is that you have to ensure that your consumer franchise remains with you. Yeah, you grow market shares, you don't lose market shares. And the second important bit is that your broad construct of the business model remains intact.
Industry body FICCI believes the government has done an impressive job with COVID vaccination, tax collection, FDI and merchandise exports this year. In fact, the year 2021 was all about fighting the pandemic, staging economic recovery, and in between, maintaining your finances well. Equities for sure proved to be the best investment avenue as the BSE MCAP hit a record high this year. And as we enter the last week of 2021, let us recap all that shaped the market this year and the lessons you need to take with you in 2022. COVID-19, inflationary concerns, policy tightening, and IPOs. These words can largely sum up the roller coaster year that 2021 was for equity markets. Despite a brief period of slowdown in the economic activity owing to partial lockdown in early part of the year, equity markets staged an imperial rally in 2021. The Sensex hit a record high of 62,245 on October 19, while the Nifty 50 index claimed a lifetime high of 18,604. The market cap of all listed companies grew about $1 trillion during the year to as much as $3.56 trillion, with India almost breaking into the elite top 5 club in terms of market cap. Manish Jain, who is fund manager at Ambit Asset Management, sums up 2021 for us. Listen in.
Performance of 2021 can be at best summarized as topsy-turvy roller coaster, if I may say so. What started off on a very strong note, when we were coming out of the first wave, the travel tourism sector had taken over, multiplexes were about to open, the malls had opened up. The economy was going strong. 2022 looked like it was going to be the year for India. 11.5% estimate of GDP growth rate. We were going to be the fastest growing economy in the world. Everything was going right, and it was like a blink and you miss it kind of a rally. The whole movement from 10,000 Nifty to 14,500 Nifty happened in a matter of couple of months before something equally unexpected hit us, which was the second pandemic wave. The market correction was a little short-lived. It was just about a couple of weeks, 1,500 odd points or thereabouts. And since then, it has been a very steady and a very long run where FII's flows have been positive, DII flows have been positive, mutual funds have been buyers, the IPO pipelines have been very, very strong. And right up till the middle of November, the Indian equity markets continue to go really, really strong.
That apart, slowdown in China, chip shortages, crude oil price rise, commodity inflation, and global central banks turning hawkish were some of the global factors that shaped the markets this year, he says. This blink and miss rally was largely supported by MFs and retail investors. As per data compiled by HDFC Securities, India had about 77 million Demat accounts at the end of November this year, while SIP accounts at the end of the previous month was 48 million. There were about 29 million active broking clients and about 117 million mutual fund folios. Total equity mutual fund asset under management stood at 1,320 billion rupees. Ajit Mishra, VP Research at Religare Broking, attributes this stunning participation in equities to lack of other investment avenues.
To start with, we were hit by the deadly second wave, which derailed the economic recovery. And then in the following month, the markets were struggling with the inflation. And lastly, we are again seeing this, the new COVID variant hitting the Indian shores. So amid all the challenges, the equity markets have performed exceptionally well. We have generated a return of over 18% so far. Besides the market resilience, we feel the increased participation from the retail investor was another key highlight which we saw in 2021. And initially we saw an uptick in the retail participation in 2020 during the first wave, and markets were not sure that whether this trend is going to continue in 2021 as well. But with the lack of avenues for investment and the knowledge part also played critical role, as people come to know that without equity participation it's very difficult to beat inflation. So that also helped to increase or maintain the retail participation. And the data shows phenomenal growth of over 50% on YOY basis.
And not just secondary market, retail and FPI activity was remarkable in the primary markets this year.
In line with the secondary market, the retail participation was remained strong thanks to the phenomenal listing gains. However, with the recent correction and a few subdued listings, they are now approaching the markets, primary markets selectively. But overall, we expect the buoyancy to continue, keeping in mind the the list of IPOs which are lined up ahead.
So what would be the one key takeaway that investors should draw from 2021 and take into next year?
I think one is the fact that it is always going to be a roller coaster ride. It is always going to be a cycle. Nothing is really ever structural. So as an investor, what you need to do is to understand how to time the exits more accurately rather than the entries. Second lesson for me is cyclicality is always going to be inherent. Nothing that goes up will always keep going up. What goes up will always come down. So invest in quality stocks, invest in good and clean stocks, invest in what are proverbial coffee can stocks, which will give you structural, long-term growth in your portfolio. You will make wealth, create wealth through the power of compounding.
And as we enter the last week of 2021, monthly FNO expiry of December series and listing of HP Adhesives, Supriya Life Sciences and CMS Infosystem will be the key events this week. On the bourses, the Nifty may trade within a 900-point range of 16,300 to 17,400. The Sensex, on the other hand, may trade between 55,600 and 58,700. After the markets, let's see what else is making news. According to the Reserve Bank of India, banks have written off over 2 lakh crore rupees of bad loans in the fiscal ended March 2021. Loans help banks shore up profits, but when turned bad, they also eat into the profits. Our next report tells us more about the type of loans and when they are categorized as bad.
People borrow money for various reasons. It could be to expand their business, to fund higher education, to buy a home or a car, or to get a ring for their partner or spouse. Loans generally fall into two categories, secured and unsecured. Let us first understand what a secured loan is. Secured loans are those for which a borrower keeps some asset as surety or collateral to borrow money. Collateral can be your car, your home, or anything that is valuable. It simply means that in the event of default, the lender can use the asset to repay the funds it has advanced the borrower. Common types of secured loans are mortgages and auto loans, in which the item being financed becomes the collateral for the financing. With a car loan, if the borrower defaults on the payment, the loan issuer can seize the vehicle. When an individual or business takes a mortgage, the property in question is used to back the repayment terms. In fact, the lending institution maintains equity in the property until the mortgage is paid in full. If the borrower defaults on the payments, the lender can seize the property and sell it to recoup the funds owed. Now, let us talk about unsecured loans. Unlike the secured loans, unsecured loans are taken without keeping a collateral. If the borrower defaults on this type of debt, the lender initiates a lawsuit to collect what it is owed. Lenders give funds in an unsecured loan solely on the borrower's creditworthiness and promise to repay. Banks charge a higher interest rate on the unsecured loans as they are high risk. Also, credit score and debt to income requirements are usually stricter for these types of loans. While giving unsecured loans, banks check credit history of the borrower. Any past default may lead to cancellation of the loan. Apart from that, the borrower's financial condition is also checked to find out if he will be able to repay the loan. Examples of unsecured loans are personal loan, education loan, and credit card transactions. And when a bank finds that a loan or outstanding money owed are no longer recoverable, it is marked as a bad loan. The RBI recently said in an RTI reply that banks have written off a whopping Rs 11.68 lakh crore worth of bad loans in the last 10 years. Apparently, most of them were unsecured loans. People who don't want to pledge their assets or don't have property to apply for a secured loan opt for unsecured loans. It is a good option if you are looking for immediate cash.
Well, one should consider all the factors, most importantly, the interest rate before taking any loan. That's all we have for you today. We will be back with more news and analysis in our next episode. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views, and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram, and LinkedIn.